Greetings once again, friends, and live from Retro Central here on the hottest day of the summer in Western Massachusetts. My name is Peter, and thank you very much for checking out this latest episode of Consolation. As always, I genuinely appreciate the time that you take to check out my work, and I hope that you'll enjoy today's topic and maybe take something away from it. If you look on the whiteboard, I have written every game counts. It's something that I've firmly believed since I started adding games to my retro library back in 2011, when I started moving away from the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 and moving back towards the original PlayStation and PlayStation 2 before I really expanded my library to older systems a year later. Whether a game is on a disc or a cartridge, as long as you have that particular form of media, a game is a game. You can pop it into your system and you can play it. Granted, if you don't have instructions, you may have a difficult time figuring out what the objective is or what the controller layout is. But thanks to the internet, manuals are kind of optional. As much as I hate to say that because I complain about not having manuals in new games, that irritates me, and that's a story for another time. But if you're just buying a game to put it in your library because you want to play it, and you can buy it at a fairly reasonable price, a manual is not a make or break kind of thing. Neither is a box or a case. Something to understand, especially with original PlayStation games, such as you see Ghost in the Shell here over on the GXTV, is that those jewel cases were extremely susceptible to breakage. Those hinges, you could look at them the wrong way and they would snap. So a lot of people would, when the cases would snap, they would put them into disc binders, and then when it was time to trade the games in, they would just trade them in loose without the manuals because they threw them away or they lost them and the cases were broken. Now, as for myself, when it comes to loose games, sorry about the extreme close-up there, I have a full binder, and this thing, the camera doesn't show you how heavy this is. You could see my arm shaking. This binder is full of loose disc games that I've accumulated over the last 4 years. Many of these are PlayStation 2 games. You're probably not going to be able to see this because it might be out of the way of the camera. I really don't want to tilt this because some of the games will fall out. But this thing is just full of discs that I have picked up over the years. Many of them from GameStop when they were first starting to really get rid of their PS2 games for pennies on the dollar. But there are also some original PlayStation games, a couple of GameCube, and a couple of Sega CD games in here. All of these games work. I have tested each and every one of them in my system to make sure that they work just fine, and they do. These games, if you put basic values on them, would probably be, even at $1 a game, and there's probably 400 games in here, so at least $400 worth of games just in here. Now, with loose disc games, kind of like with sports games, there seems to be a stigma as to whether they belong in your library. If you're a collector, are loose games worth it? And that's a question you have to ask yourself individually. We come back to the all-powerful question. Why do you collect? Why do you buy games? Do you collect as a trophy case kind of thing where you can show it off? Things that are rare, things that are complete. You need to have every single piece of documentation to go with the game to make it as complete as possible. Are you looking to get your games rated? Or are you someone that just likes to add games to your library just to be able to play them at will? I'm definitely a guy that's the latter. When I pick up a game, 95% of the time I am picking it up because I'm going to play it at some point, or I want to have it so I can play it at will. In my case, sports games make up a lot of that particular library. If you know me at all, talking on Twitter, knowing that I do some contribution work for hitthepass.com, which is a sports video game website, sports video games are one of my passions. They have been for many, many years. It's not just the disc-based games, it's the cartridge-based games too. Heck, just looking over at my Nintendo library, Bad News Baseball, Base Wars, 3 of the bases loaded games out of the 4. 10-Yard Fight is up there. Super Tecmo Bowl, or Tecmo Super Bowl, I should say. I got to get that right. That I wound up getting complete from Game Exchange a year or two ago. Tecmo Bowl's over there. Tecmo Super NBA Basketball is over there. And that goes for my Genesis and Super Nintendo libraries as well. Plus, if you look at my PlayStation and PS2 libraries, sports games make up a significant amount. Many of the PS2 games are loose. Many of the original PlayStation games happen to be complete. But sports games to me have value. And loose games have value too. Not because I'm looking to turn around and resell them. Not because I'm necessarily turning around to show them off to anybody. First of all, because getting into this room, it's no big tour. You take 2 steps in here, you see everything there is to see, and you turn around and walk out. I'm not running a museum. But to have over 1,500 games at my disposal to be able to play at will whenever I want, whenever I have the urge or the time, is a nice thing to have. Some are complete, some are not, and I'm okay with that. Now, loose games, you can also find really good deals on, especially when GameStop was really trying to desperately get rid of them. And I'll show some of those off to you first. Persona 4 was one of those that used to be really, really valuable before it came out as a PlayStation 2 classic, and then it was re-released as Persona 4 Golden for the Vita. I got this, which came with the soundtrack disc. This was converted from new to used. I got this for $4. I think it was 2 years ago. And that was when the game was $30 used at GameStop. So getting both of these and having neither disc been played was definitely a nice find. Killer 7, which is celebrating its 10-year anniversary this year. Has it really been 10 years? This I got from my friends at Game Depot in Holyoke, Massachusetts, one of my favorite stores. I've talked about them repeatedly on this channel. They didn't know what to do with this because it was loose. They didn't think anyone would want it. As a matter of fact, they were going to use it as a wall decoration, and I persuaded them to sell it to me for a cheap price. And the game has got some value to it, even loose. The game still works when I put it in my PlayStation 2, fire it up, and continue to get to one point in the game that I can't get through. And then I turn it off and I don't come back to it for 6 months. But still, it's a fun conversation piece, and it was a really nice find. The PlayStation 2 version is something I hadn't seen as much as the GameCube version, even though the GameCube version, we know it is better. Technically, it runs better. This is another one I found this is one of the ones that I found at GameStop that is now worth a fair amount of money. And I paid $1 for this. This is King's Field, the Ancient City. From Software, as a matter of fact, the Souls people. The King's Field games, you either love them or hate them. This I picked up because it was so cheap. I've tried to play it a couple of times and failed miserably. As a matter of fact, if there was a stage below miserably, that would be where my effort wound up lying. But still, to find this and to kind of just have it in my library over the last 2.5 years or so, and to see the value go up has been pretty interesting. I think some of it has to do with the rampant success of the Souls games, and then going back and trying to see some of From Software's earlier efforts. This game is definitely tough to play without a manual. Got to check online to see what the controller does and for a walkthrough and such, but still a nice addition to your library. This game I got for $4 as well. This is now worth $30 in climbing. This is Def Jam Fight for New York for the PS2. This game, Def Jam Vendetta, I thought was a pretty cool game, even though I struggled with it a little bit. This game, I am absolutely terrible at. Probably 50% of you could beat me at this game with both hands and both feet tied behind your back, because I'm just that bad at it. But still, it was a cool find, and the game is still a fun play today. As a matter of fact, if I remember right, isn't Aki Software the WCW NWO Revenge and the N64 wrestling team? I think they're responsible for this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's right. So this was a cool find. And again, $4, and the game's worth $30 now. Another game that's in double digits that I got for $1. This is Dual Hearts for the PS2. This is a Sony Computer Entertainment Japan game, I think, and Atlas did some of the localization work. Haven't actually had a chance to play this yet. Shame on me. I should really try and do that. And then the 2 Way of the Warrior games. Here's the 2 for the PS2. Here's Way of the Samurai and Way of the Samurai 2. Paid just a couple of dollars for each of these. The first game isn't quite as valuable as the second, but both are still definitely worth a spot in my library. I love the whole open world, almost like a Yakuza kind of feel, where there's combat when you want there to be. There's a lot of dialogue. The comparison probably isn't just right, but I think you understand where it is that I was getting at with the comparison. At least I hope you did. And then even for the original PlayStation, I found a couple of loose games that are pretty valuable that I got good deals on. This is Deception 2 Kagero, which I got at Bookman's in just Phoenix, Arizona, back in 2011 when I very first started building my PlayStation library. I got this for cheap. It had come only with the generic case, which I got rid of. But the Deception series, this, and then Deception 3 Dark Delusion, which I got from Game Hunters in Springfield, Massachusetts earlier this year at another cheap price because it wasn't complete. The game still plays very well. These games are an absolute blast, a little bit of a guilty pleasure because they're just so brutal and so nasty. And they remind me that I need to spend some money if I get it and get Deception 4 for the PS4 at some point. But these games you don't find very often. They're not really out in the wild as much because there weren't a lot of them made. There really wasn't a lot of interest in the games. So to be able to find them out in the wild and to pay relatively decent prices, if not better, for them was kind of neat. And the games function just fine. Pop them in my PS1 down here or my original PlayStation. I gotta stop using that PS1 term, and they work okay. And the last one that I wanted to show off, because this is probably my biggest and best deal when it comes to loose games this year, is Konami Arcade Classics, which I got from a local game store, which will not be named. They were selling their loose disc games just to kind of get rid of them, so they were priced for a couple of dollars a piece. This game was actually valued at $50, and I got it for $2. And after my visit to this particular game store, they pulled their PlayStation games off the shelf to reprice them all because they realized that they were practically giving them away and shouldn't have been. So I was the catalyst of a price increase at that particular location. Again, I will not name names, but this was probably the coolest find. And I actually used to own this when it had come out back in 1997, I believe, or 1998. Just because Yi Kung Fu is on here, which is one of my favorite coin ops. I used to play at a convenience store near my apartment complex growing up. So this was a cool find. So, loose disc games. I know I've gone through and shown you a lot of them. I've shown you my disc binder. Of the 1,500 games that I have, loose games probably make up 60%, if not more, of my library between cartridges and discs. But it all depends on what your motivation for collecting is, what your motivation for buying games would be. If you're a serious collector, almost like a trophy case kind of collector, I can completely understand bypassing certain games because they don't have manuals, or because the cases aren't included, or they're not the original cases, or it's not even a black label game. These are things I do understand. But from my perspective, as someone who plays first and collects second, the games that I spend money on, what little money I do have, or games that I trade in other games for, are games that I genuinely and sincerely intend to play and want to have in my library. Not to show off as a conversation piece per se, but something that I can pop in, like Ghost in the Shell over here, and say, yeah, I remember playing that 1997 or whenever the game came out, and that game was pretty fun. You guys know that this game was also developed by the same team that gave us Jumping Flash, right? So of course I wanted to try this out. So your motivation may vary from mine, but what does not change at the end of the day is that every game counts. Complete in box, missing the manual, missing the box, or even just loose. As long as it works and as long as it plays, you and your library both gain. As always, thank you very much for checking out this episode of Consolation. I really do appreciate it. Now I've got to run and turn the air conditioners on before I start to melt. Until next week, my friends, thanks for watching, and take care.